your body has an amazing, if you think about it, our bodies have an amazing detoxification system that's happening millions of times per day when the liver cells and the other cells are really working really, really hard to keep our bodies clean.
Welcome to Peak Health with Dr. Gupta, where we talk about optimizing your health and maximizing your genetic potential. Today, we're going to discuss the topic of detoxification. Detoxification is the process by which the body eliminates toxins or harmful substances from the body. The organs responsible for this process include the liver, the kidneys, the lungs, and the skin. These organs naturally detoxify the body through processes such as sweating, urination, and breathing. However, some people argue that the modern diet and lifestyle have led to an accumulation of toxins in the body, and that additional detoxification measures are necessary. For example, many of you have heard about the celery cleanse or juice cleanses or detox baths, and the list goes on and on. Are these methods based on scientific evidence, or are they just marketing gimmicks? To answer these questions, we have our special guest today, who really needs no introduction as he's been on this podcast several times, Dr. Andy Wong, co-founder and director of Capital Integrative Health. Welcome, Andy.
Hey, Ravi. Thanks so much for having me on today. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Happy to have you on. Why don't we just start with a simple question, as I always do. What exactly is detoxification in your words, and what are the phases of detoxification?
Yes, thank you. Well, let's talk about, I want to break down for the audience for a second the terms toxin and toxicant. Let's talk about that first. So we have the term toxin, which is defined by the CDC as, a substance that is produced naturally, but a poisonous substance. So it could be something that a bacteria produces, something like lipopolysaccharide that then causes gut issues. It could be something that a vegetable produces, a plant, It can be also, something that's a substance that basically will kill off cells or alter growth, or, it can even kill, organisms, right? We know that there's a lot of substances that are produced by even like poison dart frogs and things like that, right? I just saw something on Netflix where you have these like bright blue frogs. Like, oh, it's so beautiful. And then it's like, oh, but it can actually kill you if you touch it, right? So these are things that we know in the popular literature and on social media and stuff. But then there's also toxicants. So these are chemicals that can really kill living organisms, and is typically talked about as a toxic substance, a toxicant, that is produced by or a byproduct of human activities. So we know about things like dioxin, we know about things like arsenic, and so that lead, mercury, these type of things that actually are found in nature. But then there's increased production of these from industrial activity that's been happening, especially over the last 100 to 200 years. So really, your question about I think you mentioned the intro, do we need more detoxification? I will talk about the different phases of detoxification first, and then we'll kind of talk about, are these miracle cures really miracles? How do we talk about detox? So we talk about basically 4 to 5 different organs in the detoxification quote unquote system. The liver is responsible for at least 60% of all detoxification. So we would call it the master detoxification organ. And we'll go into the liver phase, detoxes in a bit in terms of the different phases of liver detox. The other organs that are involved, which are really, really important to not ignore, we'll focus on the liver first, but we do want to make sure that we know that it's really important to have good urination. So that's going to be, kidney, and having good urination to, urinate out some toxins there. The colon, which will be involved in, of course, production of healthy and regular bowel movement, because a lot of times toxins are, once the nutrients are absorbed in the small intestine, then the waste products are in the colon, and then that gets excreted. So that's going to be really important. Besides the liver, the kidney, and the colon, of course, we have the skin, which is the largest organ of the body, external organ anyway, that we know. And so the skin is going to be important for detoxification, because there are certain toxins, especially things like plastics, that can only be excreted through sweat. And so that's why exercise is really important. We can talk about that. And then in addition to the skin, we have the lymphatic system, which is an internal. And the lymphatic system is kind of collecting all these different toxins and eventually going to pass them on to either the urine or the stool. And so that's kind of an intermediate system, but having a good lymphatic system is really critical as well. And that's why things like body work and sauna and even things you can do at home like dry brushing are really, really important. So a lot of these things you can do. But I think the biggest thing, early on we want to talk to your listeners about, Ravi, is that your body has an amazing, if you think about it, our bodies have an amazing detoxification system that's happening millions of times per day when the liver cells and the other cells are really working really, really hard to keep our bodies clean. Let's face it. Let's actually do a little visualization right now, if you don't mind. And right now, what I'm doing is I'm visualizing the Earth, right? Pretend we're astronauts and we're kind of up in outer space, and we're seeing this, great, big black outer space. And we have some stars and things, and we see the Earth. But imagine that we have a bunch of chemical factories there. We have pollutants, we have smog, we have different things that are happening to the planet. And, a lot of times we look at this and we visualize the Earth, we kind of see it from a macro level, like it's so beautiful, and it is. And what we've been doing over the past, especially 100, 200, 300 years post-industrial revolution is we've been polluting the Earth. So the issue is not that our bodies can't detoxify, because our bodies are doing an amazing job, millions of times a day, of really taking these chemicals and transforming them into something safer that can be excreted by our detox organs. But it's just the toxic load and the toxicant load is much higher now than it was 100, 200 years ago. And so you imagine that Earth with this like smog around it, right? That's kind of what we're dealing with, even though we don't see it from a macro level. Now let's talk about the liver, which is our main, we can call it if there was a kingdom of detox organs, the liver would be the king and queen. It'd have that nice little tiara or whatever you call it, sitting on the throne there. It is really the master detox organ. What would you say?
I said both the king and queen combined.
Both the king and queen, yeah. Gender neutral. It's really, really all of the above. Because with a functioning liver, again, the liver deals with literally so much shit, you know what I mean? Like so much stuff. You can also bleep that out if you want. That, if you think about a sewer system, right? If you think about a sewer system, like we all are generally living in areas where there's municipal systems that are filtering out waste products. But by the time it gets to our drinking water in the public health system, we're drinking water that typically is pretty clean. We're not getting diarrhea from drinking the water, right? So in the same way, our liver is detoxing our bodies a very natural way and a very regular way, that we're not actually subjected to the effects of the toxicants that we would be if the liver wasn't working well.
Yeah.
And it's doing this in the background. It's kind of running this amazing, almost like computer programming, automatic detox system in the background. So the question of do we need extra detox is going to be really dependent individually on that person's constitution, on their toxicant burden, and then on their ability of their own body to detox. Some people do need a little bit of extra detox, and it gets into things like genetics and epigenetics and things like that. But liver is going to be kind of divided. We're going to talk about kind of the detox system as a whole. Phase 1 liver detox is going to be something where essentially is basically called oxidation reduction and hydrolysis. So the simple way to think about phase 1 is that this pathway converts a toxic chemical, or I should say that this pathway actually converts a fat soluble toxin, because toxins are fat soluble, meaning they will dissolve in fat. So whether it's visceral fat, or whether it's cell membranes, which are fatty, whether it's the brain, which is 60% fat, these toxins get stored in the body, but the liver's job is to try to change a toxic substance to something that is safe to excrete, usually often by either urine or stool. Now, phase 1, which is the oxidation reduction, actually converts that toxin into what's called a reactive intermediate. The reactive intermediate actually, I kind of am a simple person, Ravi, and I can't really understand all, scientific, as a doctor, yes, but, as an English major. So we're going to go with these analogies here that people can understand. So if I take a potato. Let's pretend this potato is a toxin. It's not. It's good. Sometimes it's nice to eat potatoes, but let's pretend we heat up this potato. We might even heat up in the oven and it becomes really hot. And so we're transforming that into something that could be okay, but it's super hot. If you take that potato in your hand and at 450 degrees, what's going to happen to your hand? It's going to get burnt, right?
Right.
So a toxin that then changes to an intermediate metabolite, if that hot potato is not neutralized, so to speak, and you put some water on it, you let it cool off, and you can excrete that, quote unquote toxin, then it can damage the cells in your body. So
Yes.
this intermediate metabolite then gets changed in phase 2, which is called the conjugation pathway. And conjugation pathway.
And before you go on, let me just summarize this, because what you said so much information, and I just want to make sure people understand.
Yeah.
So basically, what you're saying is that we are constantly exposed to toxins. You're in a visualization exercise about visualizing the earth and the pollutants and the industrial pollutants, the plastics, and all that kind of stuff. We're constantly exposed to those things. We weren't exposed to those things hundreds of years ago. This is something that's relatively new, and our bodies were not designed to detoxify and manipulate all of these chemicals that we're exposed to. Now, we can do it. It's not like we are incapable of doing it, but it requires extra energy, extra reactions, extra coenzymes and nutrients and all those types of things to make it happen. So what you're saying, the primary detoxifier is the liver. The king and queen, general neutral detoxifier is the liver. And the liver there's two phases. You just described phase 1, which is what we call the CYP450 enzymatic phase, right? So that's the phase where there's oxidation reduction, hydrolysis, and there's nutrients that are used in that phase, but that's where you get the reactive oxygen intermediates that are produced. So in order to metabolize these toxins, you produce a reactive intermediary, and then it goes to phase 2, and that's what you're describing now. Phase 2 is a process where you take this reactive intermediary and conjugate it so that it is not toxic and it's able to be excreted. So I just want to summarize that so people understand. Let's go ahead with phase 2.
Thank you, Ravi.
Sure.
I would just say one more thing about phase 1, which you brought up, is that our bodies have evolved over millions of years to have these cytochrome P450 enzymes in the liver, the system of detoxification of things like chemicals, pollutants, microbial byproducts, but also drugs, drugs that are prescription drugs, over-the-counter drugs. These are detoxified by phase 1 liver detox, which is the cytochrome P450 system. And right now what's happening in our world is that we have so many toxins that the toxins are overrunning our own kind of evolutionary system, because this was designed for millions of years ago when we didn't really have all these toxins. It's kind of like it can deal with some toxins, but it's hard to deal with all of them coming at one time. So in phase 2, which like you said is conjugation, again, what's happening is that intermediate metabolite that could be potentially damaging to the cells then turns through a process called conjugation into something called an excretory derivative, which basically is something that is water soluble. It can get peed out or pooped out. And the idea is that you're going to need really healthy kidney function, colon function for this to happen, but you also need various nutrients that are involved in these different conjugation reactions for that to happen. So going back to the hot potato analogy, if you have that hot potato in the middle of that between phase 1 and phase 2, phase 2 is kind of like cooling off that potato so you can handle it and deal with it. And then phase 2, we can talk about, I don't know if you want to talk about different nutrients that are needed for these phases now or later,
Sure.
but
or maybe we could talk about those in just a little bit, because we are going to talk about nutrients. These are the two basic phases of detoxification. We have the toxin that you described, goes through phase 1, creates an intermediate metabolite, which is a reactive oxygen intermediate. And then it's conjugated through phase 2, and then it's excreted through the bile, the feces, or your kidneys, your urine. You can sweat out these toxins, as you mentioned earlier. That's basically the process in which this happens. There are many nutrients that are used in this process. There are also plant derivatives and antioxidant types of support mechanisms that this detoxification process has. so that it can operate well and cleanly. And what happens, Andy, if, for example, you go through phase one, but you don't have the substrate to complete phase two? Well, like, what's the consequence?
Well, the consequence is that these intermediate metabolites, Ravi, form what's called reactive oxygen intermediates, which then damage the cells and tissues. And basically, what that means in terms of damage to cells and tissues is it creates what's called in functional medicine oxidative stress. It basically means there's damage to things like fats and proteins and basically the cellular structures, which then ultimately lead to cellular damage, including DNA damage. So ultimately, what may happen in those situations is that people can develop things like cancer from those, DNA damage. But it could be something, less obvious, like people might have symptoms, like they might have trouble with energy production because their cellular machinery is not working as well because they had that oxidative stress, that damage. I kind of think of it like rust. Oxidative stress is like rust on a bicycle. Like if you're riding that bicycle and you get it caught out in the rain and you haven't like dried it off, what's happening is that the inflammation and oxidative stress that happens from incomplete detoxification causes rusting of your system. And no one wants rusting of their cells, right? That leads to aging, that leads to accelerated aging, that leads to tissue damage, and it can lead to even things like cancer. I think on a more kind of very common level, people might see with detoxification, they might have trouble with things like hormone production or sleeping. They might have trouble with energy, so they might be complaining of fatigue or say exercise intolerance, where they can't do as much as they used to. All these things are potential symptoms of detoxification, issues. So really, there's a lot of potential symptoms for this.
Yeah, and so there's, as you were describing, you could have severe consequences. You could have non-specific symptoms, and it's because there's so much energy and resources going into this process, especially when you have free radicals. Then there's more energy going into taking care of those inflammatory particles and that damaged tissue, and it's using up resources that you could use in other ways, and then that manifests.
Exactly. Inflammation drains energy. Think of inflammation as a fire. And if there's a fire somewhere, let's say there's fire, that's a big fire and it's attracting a lot of firefighters to that area to deal with that oxidative stress. That's then less resources to, have other kind of people or other people like, that are going to be helpful for other things in the body. So I would say that's other resources that we would say could be making energy or helping digestion, helping cognition, all these different things. So like you said, it is a resource allocation issue, I think, with inflammation, and that will affect energy.
Yeah, it's interesting. I remember in medical school and even in residency, the one main condition which we would think about in terms of glutathione in phase two was Tylenol or acetaminophen toxicity. We saw people being hospitalized for this. And this is a perfect example of how these pathways work and can harm you, because if you take too much Tylenol or acetaminophen, you go through a phase one reaction, it creates a free radical, and you need glutathione to conjugate that. And if you don't, it could cause permanent liver damage, and people actually will die from this condition. And, I remember, Andy, you and I would admit, not infrequently, we admit patients, we may have shared patient with Tylenol overdose.
Absolutely. You were probably my attending, but yes.
Right. Yes. Tylenol overdose, and, you treat them with N-acetylcysteine, which is one of the substrates for glutathione production, and that will save their life. So, these aren't just like random, unimportant pathways we're talking about here. These are potentially life-saving pathways.
And since you mentioned Tylenol, Ravi, I'll also mention a favorite of our time in a Georgetown residency, which is alcohol. Yeah. not that we were always drinking, but you remember the times post clinic with the Guinness and all of that, right?
Yes.
And then we also know that people came to the ER and a lot of times they were drunk, they needed a banana bag and things like that, right? But alcohol, for the listeners out there, is a toxin, right? Alcohol is a toxin, and it will need to be dealt with by the liver as well. And that's why not only is there things like non-alcoholic liver disease, but there's also alcoholic liver disease, and that can even lead to things like cirrhosis, where there's like liver failure and you need liver transplants if someone is drinking alcohol heavily for a long period of time. So that's a toxin I think people know pretty well. But one of the big lifestyle points, which I guess we can get into later, but I would just say one of the main messages today is that if you are trying to optimize your detox system, you do want to stop alcohol completely.
Yeah, and let's get to that. I mean, your body has natural ways to detoxify. The question is, what do you do to support these detoxification methods?
I get like if we have a person on an expensive, detox program and they're on supplements and they're on, all these things, it doesn't make sense for them to also be, drinking a couple shots, on the weekends. It's kind of like neutralizing the effect of that whole detox program.
Right. Exactly. I think the main thing here is to stop your exposure to whatever toxin it is. And I mean, you mentioned alcohol. We mentioned, I think we may have mentioned chemicals and food, but what other things do you think about in terms of exposures?
One of the big things, and this is a really good point, I'm glad you brought that up about toxins in food, is whether or not to eat organic or not. So let's talk about kind of the research behind that. So there's been some research and some controversy even on like, is organic worth it? We know that organic is usually more expensive. We know that organic is becoming more popular. It's available in mainstream supermarkets and things like that. There is one main reason, which is one word, to eat organic, and that's something called glyphosate. Glyphosate is one of the chemicals that's found in a substance called Roundup, right? And this is basically a chemical that's used to help increase crop production. I think it's sprayed on a lot of crops even afterwards as a desiccant, I think. But the point of glyphosate is that is a toxin and that will disrupt the gut microbiome. So it will actually kill off. I mean, glyphosate essentially is an antibiotic for your gut microbiome. So if you think about trying to avoid antibiotics to keep some of the good bacteria in there, if you're eating conventionally grown food all the time, which most of us are, then we're unwittingly, I would say, sort of unconsciously or unwittingly destroying the gut microbiome. So the idea is that that's one of those ubiquitous and insidious toxins that are out there that is affecting the gut. So eating organic, there's also a question of whether or not there's more vitamins and minerals in organic food versus conventionally grown food. I think that jury is still out. I don't think it's that clear that there's more. I think anecdotally, I noticed if I go to Mom's Organic Market or something versus I go to a conventional store, there's going to be like the colors seem deeper and there's more antioxidants things. I don't think that's clearly proven yet. I can taste the difference, but I would say buy organic for the ability to minimize the toxins that are in the food, right? So that would make a lot of sense to me.
And I would say, and I'm very glad you brought this point up because I hear this a lot from various people. They're like, oh, there's no data to support eating organic. And the one thing that you're trying to avoid, as we mentioned in the beginning of this talk, is you're trying to avoid that toxic burden. So that, there is data to support glyphosate causing adverse consequences. And, there's cases of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, reproductive.
Absolutely. I mean, glyphosate is a root cause of cancer. Yeah. Also, there is data to support there is at least, lab measurement data to support the fact that when people switch from a conventional to an organic diet, the urinary excretion of various toxins do go down. So they have measured that.
Okay.
In other words, they've put people on a conventional diet, right, organic diet, and they've found that there is less toxins in the urine that are being measured in that group that was eating organic. So
I think it translate to any clinical endpoint, or was it just the endpoint was really?
I don't think it was clinical endpoints. I think that's the next step in research is like if you have, probably there would have to be observational studies over decades to see an effect of that. But certainly that would be, I think, the next step in that. But in terms of the urinary excretion of toxins, I mean, this is often the half-life for a lot of these toxins are just a couple of days, if that. So a lot of times if people are on a organic diet for a week or a month or something like that, you're going to get pretty fast results in terms of reducing that toxic load, right away. I'd love to see more research long-term on how that affects health. But if you think about it, if there are toxins that are known, like glyphosate, like you mentioned, Ravi, that are known to cause cancer, why would you want to eat a conventional food regularly if
Exactly.
you
Yeah.
didn't have to?
If you can avoid it. Yeah.
You can avoid it. Yeah.
I ask people the same thing. Like, if you had bottled Roundup next to you, would you spray it on your strawberries and start eating them? Because in essence, that's what you're doing. So would you feel comfortable with that? And
Exactly. And then strawberries, since we're on the strawberry hunt, methyl bromide is another chemical that's in strawberries that also damages DNA. So that's the other issue. And that this is why, and let me just mention one thing here, which I think is semi-funny, semi-serious, Ravi, is that we can drive ourselves crazy by in other words, we don't want perfect to be the enemy of the good. I eat conventional food sometimes. Sometimes we shop at Trader Joe's, and that's not mom's, but it still tastes good. I'm eating with people, and it's good. So I think we don't want to make perfect the enemy of the good. And even if we do like 80-20 rule or something, that's still going to be better than not being mindful of that. And then there are ways to accelerate the detox system. So if you do eat that conventionally grown food, there are ways to help with detoxification, which we can talk about.
Yeah, it's really all about consistency, and I've learned this, and I'm sure you've seen this over time. Is if you're consistent with the behavior. Now, just let's say exercise or working out. Like you work out heavily for a day, you're not going to see muscle gains and muscle hypertrophy. But if you do that consistently, over the course of weeks and months, you're going to start seeing changes. You're going to start seeing improvements. And it goes the other way with, these types of things. So if you eat poor food on a daily basis and consistently do that, then it'll lead to consequences versus eating well and healthy on a daily basis.
So a practical action step, let's say for alcohol and organic food, let's say you're listening out there, well, I enjoy going out with my friends. I enjoy drinking, a beer or something with my conventionally raised pizza, kind of thing. Going to the bar, that maybe they're saying that. So how do you build in that to your life and make it more consistent on a healthy basis? Maybe once a month you go out with your friends and you don't have alcohol, and you say, I'm enjoying your company, Ravi, as a person, as a friend, as opposed to I'm coming out just for the beer, right?
Yeah.
So you could do that. You could also say, well, once a month I'm going to shop at an organic market, and just build that into your lifestyle. And then you start building in these systems that then naturally make your lives healthier and make the toxic load go down naturally without you having to think about it too much.
Andy, do you remember when we were kids on the milk cartons at school used to say, I don't need drugs to have fun?
Yeah.
Remember those milk cartons?
Yeah.
That's what I thought of when you gave me, when you told me that message there.
I think that's a good one. That's a good one. We should bring those back. Yeah.
We should. Hey folks, make sure to join us for part 2 of this episode, where Dr. Andy Wong and I finish our deep dive into detoxification and how you can take better care of your body so you can reach your health goals and help prevent disease. We'll see you there. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this podcast. And if you did, please make sure to hit the subscribe and the like button and leave a comment about what you'd like to see on our future episodes. Just a reminder that this podcast is for educational purposes only. It does not substitute for professional care, nor does it constitute medical or other professional advice or services. If you're looking for medical care, please seek a qualified doctor or medical professional. For more information, or if you'd like to check out our programs, please visit our website, peakwellnesshealth.com. That's peakwellnesshealth.com.